Jean-Paul Sartre did not write plays in order to popularize his philosophy. He wrote plays because philosophy on its own could not show what he most wanted to expose: what happens when freedoms collide in real time. Philosophy can analyze freedom, theatre can trap it. On stage, there is no escape into abstraction. Characters must act, they must speak, they must face one another. Excuses unravel quickly when another consciousness is present to resist them. Sartre turns to drama because it allows conflict to become unavoidable. This choice is deliberate. In Sartre's novels, consciousness reflects. In his philosophical works, concepts are clarified. In his plays, freedom is put under pressure. Theatre becomes a laboratory for human conflict, where ideas are not explained but tested. Sartre insists that conflict is not an accident of human relations, it is structural. Whenever one freedom encounters another, tension arises. Each consciousness seeks to affirm itself, to be recognized, to define the situation. But recognition is never neutral. To recognize another is also to be seen, judged, and limited. This mutual exposure produces conflict. The stage makes this visible. Unlike the inner monologue of a novel, drama externalizes struggle. Characters cannot retreat into private justification. They must confront the consequences of their choices as they unfold. Words bind, silences accuse, actions commit. Sartre's theatre strips away interior refuge. This is why Sartre rejects psychological realism. His characters are not meant to feel natural or comforting. They are placed in situations, moral, political, or existential traps that force decisions without moral shelter. Sartre is not interested in explaining why people behave as they do. He is interested in showing that they cannot avoid choosing. This becomes clear in his treatment of dialogue. Sartre's dialogue is often sharp, repetitive, and confrontational. Characters circle the same claims, accuse one another, and expose contradictions. This is not poor craftsmanship. It is philosophical design. Dialogue becomes combat. Each character attempts to stabilize their identity by fixing the meaning of the situation. Each attempts to reduce the other to a role, a motive, or a guilt. Sartre shows that this reduction is never accepted passively. Resistance follows immediately. Conflict intensifies. This structure reflects Sartre's claim that human relations are never innocent. Even love, friendship, and solidarity are shot through with power. To care about another is also to risk domination or dependence. Sartre does not romanticize this risk. He exposes it. Theatre allows him to do this without explanation. Consider why Sartre is drawn to closed settings: rooms, tribunals, occupied cities, conspiratorial spaces. These environments limit escape and concentrate pressure. Characters cannot leave, they cannot dissolve conflict by distance, they must stay and confront. This is not merely dramatic convenience, it reflects Sartre's understanding of freedom. Freedom does not disappear under constraint, it becomes more visible. The fewer the options, the clearer the choice. Sartre's characters are often trapped, but never innocent. They appeal to necessity. They cite duty, ideology, loyalty, or fate. Sartre systematically dismantles these appeals by placing another consciousness in opposition. Someone else sees the evasion and names it. Bad faith becomes visible not through introspection, but through confrontation. This is why Sartre believes theatre is uniquely suited to ethical philosophy. Ethics is not primarily about intentions. It is about action under scrutiny. Drama stages scrutiny. The audience itself becomes implicated. Sartre does not allow spectators to remain neutral observers. The absence of narrative commentary forces the audience to judge. Characters do not tell us who is right. We must decide, and in deciding, we reveal our own commitments. This is crucial. Sartre does not use theatre to teach lessons. He uses it to force responsibility outward. The audience cannot hide behind authorial guidance. They must confront conflict as participants, even if silently. This participatory demand reflects Sartre's belief that ethics cannot be delegated. One cannot watch human conflict without becoming involved, at least internally. Judgment is unavoidable. Sartre's plays therefore refuse closure. Conflicts are rarely resolved cleanly. Guilt remains. Responsibility spreads. No character emerges morally pure. This frustrates audiences who expect redemption or catharsis. Sartre denies both. Catharsis would imply purification. Sartre believes conflict does not purify, it exposes. This exposure is the point. In staging human conflict, Sartre shows that freedom is never exercised in isolation. It always encounters resistance, from others, from institutions, from history. Theatre allows these encounters to appear not as theories, but as lived struggles. Before analyzing individual plays, Sartre wants us to grasp something more fundamental. Conflict is not a deviation from human life. It is its basic condition. People do not conflict because they misunderstand one another. They conflict because they understand enough to resist being defined. Freedom collides with freedom, meaning collides with meaning, responsibility multiplies. This collision is what Sartre places on stage. At this point, Sartre has established the function of theatre in his philosophy. It is not illustration, it is confrontation. It is the space where abstract concepts lose their safety and become dangerous. But this raises a deeper question. If conflict is unavoidable, if human relations are structurally tense, then what forms does this conflict take? How does Sartre dramatize guilt, power, bad faith, and domination in concrete situations? To answer that, we must turn to the plays themselves. If Sartre turns to theatre because philosophy cannot fully expose conflict, then his plays must be read as machines designed to force confrontation. Each play isolates a form of human conflict and strips away the usual escapes. Explanation, distance, or moral comfort. What remains is freedom pressed directly against freedom. Sartre does not use drama to explain why people conflict. He uses it to show that conflict is not accidental, pathological, or remediable through understanding. Conflict arises because human beings are conscious, free, and mutually exposed. The stage makes this exposure unavoidable. In No Exit, Sartre removes every distraction that normally softens human relations. There is no outside world, no future, no physical punishment, and no authority issuing commands. The characters are left only with one another. This is crucial. Without external constraint, each character must confront what they have made of themselves, and must confront it through the gaze of others. Sartre shows that hell is not torment imposed from above. It is the impossibility of escaping being seen. Each character in No Exit tries to stabilize their identity. They want to be admired, excused, or forgiven. They offer explanations, reinterpret their pasts, and demand recognition. But recognition requires cooperation, and the others refuse. Conflict emerges not because the characters are cruel, but because each seeks confirmation of a self-image that cannot be secured. Here Sartre reveals something fundamental. Human conflict is rooted in the struggle for meaning. Each consciousness wants its interpretation of itself to be accepted as definitive. Others resist because accepting that interpretation would limit their own freedom. No compromise is possible. Sartre denies catharsis deliberately. There is no reconciliation, no lesson learned, no transformation. The characters remain trapped because they continue to seek from others what only they can assume themselves: responsibility. This structure recurs across Sartre's theatre. In The Flies, conflict shifts from interpersonal recognition to political domination. Sartre reworks the myth of Orestes to expose how power operates through guilt rather than force. The city of Argos is not ruled by violence alone, but by a moral narrative that teaches citizens to see themselves as inherently guilty. Here, conflict appears as internalized oppression. The rulers do not need to command constantly. Citizens police themselves through remorse. Guilt becomes a political technology. Sartre shows that obedience persists not because people are weak, but because they accept a moral interpretation of themselves that binds them. Orestes' rebellion is not merely an act of violence, it is an act of reinterpretation. He refuses the guilt that legitimizes authority. Sartre stages conflict not as chaos, but as the collapse of a moral framework. What matters is not that Orestes kills, but that he refuses to accept the meaning imposed on his act. He accepts responsibility without submitting to remorse as domination. Here, Sartre shows that conflict is unavoidable whenever power attempts to fix meaning. Freedom resists being defined. In Dirty Hands, Sartre confronts conflict within political movements themselves. The struggle is no longer between rulers and ruled, but between those who prioritize ideological purity and those who prioritize effectiveness. Sartre refuses to side with either. Characters who refuse compromise preserve moral clarity but sacrifice impact. Characters who accept compromise achieve results but incur guilt. Sartre denies the audience any resolution that would redeem one position fully. This is intentional. Sartre wants to show that political conflict does not arise from misunderstanding. It arises because values collide under constraint. Theatre allows this collision to be lived rather than explained. Here, conflict becomes tragic rather than moral. There is no correct choice that avoids damage. Responsibility attaches not because one chooses wrongly, but because one must choose at all. Across these plays, Sartre exposes a recurring pattern. Human beings attempt to secure themselves by fixing others, as guilty, as pure, as traitors, as heroes. Conflict erupts when others refuse these roles. Freedom resists being stabilized. Sartre also shows that collective conflict intensifies rather than resolves this tension. Movements, parties, and crowds amplify pressure. They demand loyalty, silence, and discipline. Sartre refuses to romanticize solidarity. Collective action multiplies responsibility instead of dissolving it. This is why Sartre's plays feel claustrophobic. Spaces close in, choices narrow, time compresses. These are not merely theatrical effects, they are ethical devices. Constraint makes freedom visible. When escape disappears, excuses fail. Sartre denies spectators the comfort of moral distance. There is no narrator to guide judgment, no voice to explain who is right. The audience must judge, and in judging they become participants in conflict. This is essential. Sartre believes that ethics cannot be learned passively. To watch conflict without guidance is to experience responsibility directly. The discomfort this produces is not a flaw. It is the point. This is why Sartre refuses catharsis. Catharsis would purify emotion and restore equilibrium. Sartre wants unrest to persist. Unrest keeps responsibility alive. His theatre does not resolve conflict, it transfers it from stage to spectator. By the end of Sartre's plays, nothing is settled. Guilt remains, power remains, freedom remains, conflict remains. This is not pessimism, it is consistency. Sartre believes that conflict cannot be eliminated without eliminating freedom. Any society without conflict would require fixed roles, unquestioned meanings, and imposed identities. Freedom would vanish. Conflict is the price of freedom. Theatre allows Sartre to make this visible without abstraction. Bodies speak. Voices accuse, silences condemn. Freedom confronts freedom without mediation. No philosophical treatise can do this. That is why Sartre turned to drama, not to illustrate ideas, but to force them into collision. On stage, freedom cannot hide. Responsibility cannot be postponed. Conflict cannot be explained away. Human beings face one another and must live with what follows. That is Sartre's theatre.